Boa tarde, good afternoon. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos. Welcome. I'm Bruna Santos. I'm Senior Advisor at the Brazil Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you all in this webinar called O Dia Seguinte, the day after, on Brazil's election and the futures of Brazil-U.S. relations. Yesterday, Brazil elected Lula for a third mandate, defeating Bolsonaro. This election, it goes without saying, was a consequential one to Brazil, to the world, and perhaps it has defined our democratic and environmental futures. It was the tightest election in history. Lula won by 2 million votes and was also the first election in Brazilian history, democratic election in Brazilian history, where the incumbent was defeated, and the first time we elected democratically someone for a third term. So we saw an unprecedented drop in abstention, first and second rounds. And this election was divisive in many ways. So we all emerged from these elections yesterday in a divided country. But what we saw is that the democratic institutional fabric of Brazil, the Supreme Court, the Electoral Court, the Speaker of the House, the leader in the Senate, they all very quickly recognized Lula's win, as well as a number of other important international players and Brazil's partners, like the United States. So I hope this conversation brings a valuable perspective to actions and opportunities ahead of us. And to comment on that, we have invited two important figures, close friends of the Brazil Institute and the Latin American program. Liliana Yalde, who is former U.S. ambassador to Brazil, and Maria Hermínia Tavares de Almeida, professor at the University of São Paulo. One more thing, I emphasize that this event is open and will be recorded and available in our website, so feel free to share it in your network. You can also comment on our website. There are like a box for questions, so feel free to engage in these conversations, to send your questions. This will be more a conversation. And with all that said, also, if you are on Twitter, tag Brazil Institute so other people can join the conversation. So I want to welcome Liliana and Maria Hermínia, and Ambassador Liliana. Maria Hermínia, thank you for being here with us. And I will start asking for your very initial remarks, and then we dig into questions. So we'll start with you, Liliana. What does this tight victory means to Brazil? What are the underlying trends in policymaking, foreign policy to watch in the short and midterm, you think? Thank you again.
So, Bruna, boa tarde. Obrigada pelo convite, and great to see Maria Hermínia again as well. So let me start with a couple of takeaways. I'm not being Brazilian, but certainly someone who really cares about Brazil. This has been very turbulent. It's a very turbulent and chaotic campaign to watch and to understand. And here we are, but we're still trying to understand what's going to happen today or tomorrow, because President Bolsonaro has not spoken, has not accepted the results, and we don't know what he's thinking. So, there's lots of questions, and I'm sure that there's a lot of ground for continued analysis. But like you said, after all the allegations of fraud and electoral fraud, there's a celebration that the institutions, the electoral institutions, the democratic institutions actually worked. And in general, the elections appear to have been safely run, transparent, and credible. A lot of countries have already and institutions have already congratulated Brazil for running these. But what I see is very complicated governance issues coming up. because the country is clearly divided. I mean, almost like divided south and north, divided in governorships, 12 versus 13, a Congress that is very pro-Bolsonarista, and just the population itself is torn between these two very different visions, and a very different Brazil from what Lula governed first time, second time around. The resources aren't there, the commodity boom that he had to play with, and I think the region is very different. People talk about the pink tide and put a lot of labels. I think there is a very diverse group of leftist-oriented governments. Some are very pragmatic, and so Lula will have to deal with it differently. I found it interesting that he didn't, for instance, comment about Venezuela, Cuba, or Nicaragua, or any that usually is mentioned in his acceptance speech, which tells me, but he did talk about the victory is for democracy and not for authoritarianism. And what that tells me is that he's going to have a challenging time navigating with some of his traditional friends in the region. So there's some foreign policy challenges out there. A very welcome statements on in terms of foreign policy, certainly on climate change, and re-energizing the zero deforestation approach, and certainly a lot of social issues that will be a big part of his agenda. So difficult times ahead. Despite the win, and 2 million sounds like a lot of votes if you're talking about other countries, but for Brazil, it's like razor thin. And so I think that the challenges lie ahead in terms of how Lula will be able to build alliances, coalitions, in order to be able to govern.
That's great, Liliana. Thank you so much. I will ask Maria Hermínia now to answer this very broad questions, but I want to hear your initial remarks. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good, very good, because we have avoided the worst thing that could happen to Brazil. That was a second term to Bolsonaro, who would try to control democratic institutions, would try to control the courts and all that. So I'm feeling really, really good. I think that the elections were about the future of democracy in Brazil. But I would like to make some observations, and I completely agree with the points Liliana had made, and also about her worries. But I would like, regarding the Brazilian division, it's a kind of a very interesting thing, because if you look the electoral maps, they are exactly the same in 2006, 2010, 2014, and now 2022. The states where the PT won are the same, and the states where the forces that compete with the PT are the same. I have a friend that said that even the ballot by ballot, you can see this. What happened is that the divide in Brazil since 2006 is PT and then anti-PT. This is the dynamic of political game. What happened is that the anti-PT forces now are headed by a extreme right leader, and where So I think that the changes that happen in the center to the right field, political field in Brazil, and what we have seen since 2018 is the rise of the extreme right, with a very popular, actually, leader. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that there has been a very broad democratic convergence around Lula's candidates. So we cannot say that that was a victory of the PT. That was a victory of a broad democratic coalition that goes from the center democratic right to the left, and this is the first time that this happens in Brazil since since transition to democracy. And I think this is a very positive issue, and this is also an issue that will give opportunity for Lula to build a very broad governing coalition that will have to be built in order to tackle with the challenges, not only political but also economic and international challenges that Brazil faces today. So I think from the positive side, we have this democratic coalition that was built during the elections, and since I think that Lula is a very he is a good negotiator, I think that this can be a basis for the governing coalition. On the other side, the bad news are that now the opposition to this coalition is headed by a extreme right leader.
Yeah, yesterday Lula's speech was like a leader of state, right? Kind of speech. He vouched for rebuilding the country. He said that Lula's, I think not he said, Lacey Hoffman, the president of PT, said that it will not be a PT government. It will be a government of everyone who got together to defend democracy. And in fact, yeah, he did gather an extraordinarily broad front, which included names like Marina Silva, Fernando Henrique Cardoso. It's as you said, Maria Hermínia, the anti-PT was strong because we saw the amount of the number of votes that Bolsonaro did it's quite significant. So in the anti-Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro himself also was really strong in this election. I want to ask you about probably what's in everyone's mind, the risk of strike. What do you think? Bolsonaro hasn't said anything for the past hours since yesterday. He went to sleep at 10 p.m.-ish yesterday night, and we haven't heard anything from him. What's your take on this? The risk of strikes around Brazil?
Liliana, is for me or for Liliana, for both of us?
I don't know if you, this is more like a conversation.
I don't know. I think he clearly in the past had signaled with the idea that he wouldn't respect any result different from his victory. But I think that he is waiting because the hardcore Bolsonaristas are very violent and very aggressive, but they are not so. This is a not so huge group, and now they are trying to create problems. They are blocking roads. There's in WhatsApp. There's lots of messages in this direction of not recognizing the results. But I think this is not this is not so strong. Actually, his allies in the Congress recognized the results. The president of the Senate, the president of the Chamber of Representatives, and so I think he is waiting to see what will how this kind of rebellious movement how this will evolve. But I'm not sure. We are very, everybody is worried about this. This is a very delicate moment, but the government, the results were recognized by Brazilian democratic institutions, by foreign governments. So it's not a very easy position for him to say there has been fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fully agree. Obviously, Maria Hermínia is there and can feel it, the pulse of the country. But I would imagine also that there's probably little appetite for those type of violent disruptions. I would think that people want to get on with business and some level of normalcy. To be able to, deal with some very big issues on the personal level. And I would imagine that, I don't know President Bolsonaro, but that he probably, his personality is one to make a lot of noise and say a lot of things. And, he talked about the military, and the military, I think, behaved in a very democratic way. And so I think, he runs out of tools in the toolkit, but the real question is that core support and what will they do, regardless of whether they're a small group but they can still make trouble. So I think the longer the silence, the more speculation, and the more unease, and people will start just saying things, writing things, and of course social media, it just feeds into social media. So hopefully there'll be some message soon.
Yeah, hopefully. And the last news I got is that he requested to the Minister of Defense to see the audits of that the military did on second round. So that it's very aligned to Nick's question. Nick Zimmerman just sent a question, and he want to know how does the military respond in this moment, and how can a request for a recount impact the situation move forward if Bolsonaro makes his statement and requests that. How you think, Maria Hermínia, that the military will respond to this? I think you are on mute, Maria Hermínia.
Sorry, I really don't know. I think that we don't know what are the discussions among the military, but I would say that it will be they think institutionally. Those that are in the military, not those retired that are in the inner circle of Bolsonaro's government. I think they think institutionally, and institutionally is a huge risk now to create some idea that this was not proper process, since the government, the foreign governments already have recognized the results, since the court and the electoral court recognize it, and since the Congress also. So I think it will, those military that think strategically about their role, I think they are, it would be a huge risk to go. This is a kind of adventure, and nobody knows how can end. And I think they won't risk to support Bolsonaro under those conditions. But I don't know. Nobody knows. And so what the Bolsonaristas are trying to do is creating turmoil, confusion, conflicts, so they can say, "Oh, come on, military," and then you make peace. But I don't think this can be a successful strategy. Who knows? But I'm quite optimistic.
Yeah, it seems like there won't be any very well organized movements of violence and all, but let's see how it plays out. If he requests or not a recount, and how the military will play or not a role. I will ask a little bit about foreign policy, and then I come back and talk a little more about Congress and public policy. But I want to hear from you, Liliana. The world where Lula governed in 2003 was a very different one, especially when you look at the role of the multilateral organizations, for example. The world was less polarized, I would say. So how might the regional dynamics and other Latin American states be impacted by election results?
Well, if we look at the region, I personally believe that he will distance himself from what people think, like, right before the election, Maduro came out with a strong statement supporting Lula. And I thought to myself, wow, that's not really helpful. Because I think because of where Brazil is, it needs to be more middle of ground. And I think you'll see a Lula that will be much more moderate. And he has stated that he wants to distance himself from the authoritarianism. So dictators like Maduro, Ortega, so countries, Cuba, I think he will figure out a way, and he is a political animal, of maneuvering it. And I do think it's an opportunity for the region where you have these situations, to have Lula play a more active role democratically, let's say. I see him, for instance, in being more active in things like Haiti. They're now going through a tremendous crisis, and I see the possibility of engaging there. Brazil was a leader in the peacekeeping mission, MINUSTA. And so there's tremendous amount of experience with the military. I see him being more active in those kind of regional issues. In his acceptance speech, he mentioned Africa. I see him being interested more in the trilateral cooperation, for instance, that he was very active in. With the United States, there was some effort to work with cooperation of the U.S. Development Cooperation, that's USAID, and the equivalent of the Brazilian cooperation on issues of food security in Africa or in Central America. I think he will look for those opportunities to be more active in those kinds of global challenges, and to place Brazil kind of in a different type of stage. And so that's sort of what I predict. And again, global climate change will be a big issue and a forefront priority.
Yeah, Maria Hermínia, I want to ask you the same question, but with the following nuance. One of the things we notice when we look at the Lula 1.0 or 2.0, the first or second terms, the regional leadership played out by credit lines a lot, using BNDES, right? I think there is this hope of probably especially from Argentina, perhaps for Brazil to play a role similar to what it did in the first decade of this century. But it doesn't seem that it's possible anymore. because of the economic situation. I wanna hear your thoughts about it as well, in this effects in the region.
First of all, before going to your question, I think that climate change and environmental issues will play a huge part in the Brazilian new foreign policies. Because it's a way of winning some respectability that Brazil lost in the past. And I think that Brazil will play this strongly, either in the international fora, in the international regimes, and also it can do it at regional level. After all, the Amazon region is not only a Brazilian issue. You have all problems with the other countries that are part of the Amazon, and I think this can help to have a positive agenda that circumvents the more complicated issues about democracy, Venezuela, and all that. And so I think that environment and climate change will be a very important issue in the Brazilian foreign policies. Second, in the region, I think that Lula's government will try to rebuild a forum of discussion and moderation. That was the role of UNASUR, actually. It was not a project of integration. It was a political forum where Brazil could moderate some of its neighbors, and also could gain some protagonism in the region. And so I think that maybe Brazil will play those two issues, environment, climate change issues, and also some kind of experimenting, rebuilding something like UNASUR, where the countries can discuss their problems. And for Brazil, UNASUR was a way of moderating Venezuela, actually. In spite of it at least was an effort of the Brazilian diplomacy to moderate Venezuela, although they didn't say that explicitly. And so I think that some kind of rebuilding what quite was working in the past, and playing with new issues that can where you can build convergence. You see, the other important issue is China. Because when China was beginning to have a role in Latin America in the last Lula's government, and now is the first trade partner of Brazil and several other South American countries. And so, yeah, I think that Brazil will try to play kind of, I don't know, use China to get something from the United States, the United States to get things from China. And I think Brazil will try to balance these two forces that are important political and economic forces in the region.
Yeah, absolutely. Brazil became the main investment destination for China, right? Yeah. And it's very impressive to see how Brazil has tripled. The investment by Chinese companies in Brazil has like tripled in returning to like pre-COVID standards. So it's really impressive how the Chinese capital is inserted in the country in sectors such as energy, especially. And then talking about energy and following up on everything you said about the environment and Amazon and the role it's going to have in Brazil's policy, and especially foreign policy, is I think that Lula's speech last night was setting the tone as it should, right? And he said that like Brazil is ready to be a protagonist in the climate battle. We will protect the Amazon. Deforestation of the Amazon will be stopped. The deforestation of the Amazon will be a priority, and you think, and I think that one of the aspects for that is like how can he leverage influence to finance the protection of forests and finance research and science around the Amazon and sustainability, and also how outlining the Brazil's strategy, what is going to be Brazil's strategy on global carbon markets, for example. So that's one of the things I think is that it's a great opportunity for bridge with rebuild, also bridge between Brazil and the United States. And I wanted to hear your perspectives on that, especially Liliana.
Yeah, I think they're great opportunities. The way he talked about sustainability. I mean, there are people, indigenous communities that live in the forest. So he talked about growth, but sustainable growth. And, you know, I think he is looking for innovation and, you know, creative ways of doing this. But, you know, always mentioning sovereignty and, you know, I think that is the sensitivity that we as the United States always need to be careful on to how to approach it. And sometimes without even knowing it, we come across as like the Amazon is ours, right? And so we have to be very careful about doing this. So the space is there to do a lot because he talked about monitoring and, you know, a lot of things that where technology can be better utilized to ensure that there's proper use of the forests and to avoid all the legal kind of activity that can happen around gold and mining and so forth and logging. And that's where I heard and I can see lots of opportunity for engagement, not only with the United States, but with others, but always recognizing that Brazil's in the lead. And so I think it's going to be, like Maria Nina said, a big part of foreign policy. And for the United States and for the Biden administration, I can foresee that being a big area of engagement and much more than it has been. So great opportunities.
Yeah, do you want to comment a little bit on that?
Yes, in the same direction. I think it's a huge opportunity of cooperation with the United States. Actually, the Wilson Center has an incredible good paper on this, on the areas of cooperation, and I think we should make public or more well known that it is, because it's a great paper, and I think you can think this in the research areas. I think this is a huge field that can be open to United States and Brazilian cooperation, including in security, if the United States is prudent enough and sensible enough to this issue of sovereignty, which is very dear to the military. I think they are not so capable of ensure Brazilian sovereignty. They actually don't have a good score on this during the Bolsonaro's period. They have this Amazon plan, the Amazon Committee, and they have done very little to block organized crime of various types of organized crime that operate in the Amazon, in Brazil, and in the other neighboring countries. But I think that even this issue of security, if it is played with sensibility, I think that can work well, I think. The other one is cooperation on issues of network, of internet network. Brazil will need to have an improvement of its network infrastructure. And I think here also we'll have a huge field of cooperation that I know that involves money, involves several things, but it's not confrontative. It's not conflictive if it's well managed.
Yeah.
If I could just add, I think the point on security, some of the large criminal groups in Brazil are now transnational groups. So when Lula was president before, they didn't have the tentacles across borders that they have now. And so it's, again, I fully support it. It's almost like a must, because if you sit with your regional neighbors, you have to deal with these issues that are huge. You can't have governance in regions that don't have a presence of the government services if you don't have security. And where you have insecurity, it's usually these groups that somehow have co-opted the local populations into doing something that they shouldn't, something illegal. And so I think this is prime for kind of sitting down and talking about it, as long as it doesn't become ideological. So, there is a sensitivity of sovereignty, but there's also, if you start making it ideological, then you lose, the direction in which it really should be going.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely. You want to comment something, Maria Mina? Go ahead.
No, I completely agree with this.
Yeah.
Especially with this issue of not ideologizing the issues, because you can't do it without the ideology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a security aspect of it, how Brazil is like handling it, the borders, the role of the military in it. And it would we could do a whole another event all about it. It's something we haven't touched yet. And it's a very important element in Brazil's regional foreign policy too. So I want to, there's one question from the audience. It's Young Kaliki, public policy fellow. He asked, the U.S. is just as divided politically as Brazil. With midterms in mind, what lessons can Americans now learn from the Brazilian elections? Want to say something, Liliana? Start with you.
Well, I've always said that Brazil and the United States have so much in common. Certainly, watching the Brazilian elections, I was always very cautious about what I said, because a lot of it was happening here in terms of the way the campaigning, and I live in Florida, and it's quite a colorful, let's say, to put it diplomatically, campaign here as it was in Brazil. I think, at the end of the day, I mean, we still don't know, because we haven't heard from President Bolsonaro. If we had heard, it would be a great lesson for us, but we're still kind of waiting. But the strengths of the institution have certainly showed that they play an important role. It's been, there was no violence, and things were carried out in a timely fashion. Everything was timely, and so so far, we can see that, but I'm still waiting for that extra piece that is very critical, to be able to say, okay, you see, Brazil has done it, and we can move on and have an opposition play its role within a democracy as it should. But we're still too early to be able to tell.
I think the Brazilian Democrats in Brazil have learned a lot about the United States experience. We have moved during the whole campaign with the idea that the same thing could happen here. The essay to delegitimize the elections, maybe some kind of Capitol Hill. And I think that this helped to bring together the different democratic forces. I think it helped to have this very quick response of the institutions after the election, one and a half hour after the official results. Everybody had said no, it's okay, and so I think that Democrats in Brazil learned from what happened in the end of the Trump's administration, and in January 6th. And I hope Democrats of both countries can learn together how to confront this kind of political challenge, which is very, very huge and very difficult, because we are confronting extreme movements that have social roots. They are not how to say, they are not occasionalized. They have very strong social roots, and we must learn how to deal with this, how to speak with those that are discontent with the way our economy and our societies work. And I think that Democrats on both sides of the hemisphere have a lot to learn from each other.
Yeah, and a lot, not only in terms of how to handle populist politicians, but also I think that Brazil has seen a dramatic change in how we do politics. And we also have seen a number of people who were outsiders in the political conversation that are now engaged because of Bolsonaro's conservative ideas. They are now discussing and having a voice in this. It's more, and at the same time, we have the country identities in a crisis, and we are like trying to figure out what it means actually, our pluralism as a society. We are a diverse country, so there's a number of like challenging questions ahead of us, and that I think it's a challenge for the United States as well. And as big democracies, we can definitely learn from each other. And now I want to ask you your final thoughts, and then we will have to wrap up. One is, I think that Lula, and who am I to underestimate Lula, who was like a year ago behind bars and 2 years ago behind bars, and now he's like a president elected. But he has a challenge ahead, which is very simple. His priority is economic recovery and social prosperity. And Brazil is in an extreme fragile situation, fiscal fragile situation. And at the same time, there is no clarity around how he's gonna handle what's gonna be the new fiscal anchor for Brazil. And he said he's gonna scrap the public spending ceiling, but there is like yesterday he did mention that he wants the market to feel confident that he's able to do that. Basically saying also that he was able to do that, but as Liliana said, and you said, Maria Minha, it's a total different economic situation globally. So I want to hear your thoughts on like 100 days, the first 100 days of Lula. He's figuring out how to implement the social policies he's promising, getting Brazil on track again towards more social equality. What's going to be his priorities? How he's going to handle this macroeconomic situation that's not comfortable for anyone, especially after Bolsonaro's government, which has broken the spending cap, and it's been estimated in 400 billion, the whole inherited, that will be inherited by Lula's government. So starting with you, Maria Hermínia, and then Liliana.
Okay, I'm not sure. You see, I think he will make a very moderate government in the economy. He cannot say, I will have a fiscal anchor, because this was done by Temer, but he will do a kind of fiscal anchor. I think he will invite some very respected economists to do this. And I think that the issue of immediate or rapid economic recovery is not so difficult. I think the difficulty is to break this trend of slow growth, of unsustainable growth that Brazil has since the 90s. I think this is really the challenge, how to build institutions, and also including fiscal institutions that allow to have some kind of sustainable growth for a long period. I think that the previous government of Cardoso and also of PT were not capable of do this, and I think this is a huge challenge. I think that since the situation is not so good, you have some measures you can take immediately that can give some comfort to poor people, and also to give some insurance to the investors that he's not going to do crazy things. I think the real challenge is how to build economic institutions that can allow Brazil to grow for a longer period of time.
I would add to that very early on, and so Lula talked about taking 2 days off, and then he will work on his transition. And I suspect that one of his first actions will be to name a credible, strong economic team that will send signals of credibility to the private sector, because he urgently needs the private sector to join him, fully accompany him in this road ahead. He knows, he talked about Minha Casa, Minha Vida, all those social programs that he's done before, and he knows how to do that. But the economy will require various sectors of society to accompany him. The role of Alckmin as a VP will probably be an untraditional VP, given that he lost the governorship, or his candidate lost Sao Paulo, and being such a powerful state, but not only Sao Paulo, he lost 3 very major states. He will require a lot of work with the private sector to support him in I'm not an economist, so I don't know, but he needs to send early on a credible signal of a team that knows what they're doing, that is going to revamp the economy, to allow him to resource all the social programs that he's talking about from the start.
Absolutely. I can't wait to learn this, who's gonna be the next Minister of Economy. And well, before we wrap up, I want to say that this was a very insightful conversation. And I think that a number of answers that you both gave us and questions that you also raised are extremely important for Brazil Institute, for our audience, for our programming on the following months and days. So I will ask everyone who is watching us to stay tuned on Brazil Institute's work. We have a number of programs coming up to discuss more in depth all these items and reflections that we had today here. Also, I think it's extremely important, although everything that Liliana and Maria Hermínia brought up, especially when it comes to like building and rethinking democratic institutions and our economic institutions, because I think that both in Brazil and the United States, the crisis of democratic institutions is also a crisis of government's delivery capacity. So we have to understand how we're going to build institutions based on democratic and liberal values that can succeed transforming also the world and implementing real ideas that can change the status quo and change people's lives in a more concrete, material way. And I hope we can learn very soon what's the position of President Bolsonaro on Lula's wings. And I want to thank again Liliana, Maria Hermínia. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, inspiration, and everything you said today. It was very inspiring. Thank you.